Crewmen who are up and away themselves past the 130,000-mile halfway mark to the moon. Radioing to Earth, what they insisted was their own version of the song. They continue to transmit amazing colored television pictures of the Earth, the moon, and themselves. The impromptu disc jockey performance and complaints about the drinking water were the only things unexpected on this clockwork-precise brush with the moon, the major perils of which lie ahead.
This is a CBS News special report.
The flight of Apollo 10, brought to you by Western Electric, manufacturing and supply unit of the Bell system, as part of our continuing coverage of important news events. Reporting from the CBS News Apollo headquarters in New York, correspondent David Shoemaker.
Good afternoon. Astronauts Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, and John Young have thrown the switch, and for the fourth time in the flight of Apollo 10, we are joining them in space. It seems safe to say that they're enjoying the idea up there as much as we are here on Earth. And up there, being inside the spacecraft, were these first pictures today of that particular view. The astronauts began their transmission about 15 minutes early today, beginning with pictures of the Earth. And there is the shield that the astronauts, at least, consider a work of art.
This is obviously our patch. How's it coming through on code? Not so good, really. It looks like you've got some rather intense lighting from the back and the side. If you could get the lighting more directly on the patch, it'd be better. Yeah, that's the sun coming in.
The sun has been causing them more of a problem today than in yesterday's telecast. Just a few moments ago, they said that they doubted that they would be able to show us pictures of the moon today as they had hoped, because the sun and the moon are so close together from their vantage point that the sun overrides the moon. There's John Young.
Yeah, John coming through nicely on the tube. What was the three fingers for?
That's about as excited as you'll ever see John Young.
See our emblem today? Oh, that's beautiful.
Early space.
We're going to put some more things in it, but we just ran out of time. Roger. Is this also your emblem? This is our another emblem. Do you see any resemblance between the card and the guy holding the card? Now that you mention it.
That, of course, is Charlie Brown, which will be the code name for John Young when he is alone in the spacecraft as the lunar module descends near the moon's surface.
Now you're going to bring on that whizzer here. Okay, we got Snoopy now. Well, he's been quiet for 2 days. He's going to get a chance to do a little whooping here in the next couple days. Roger, we noticed the resemblance there, too. Thanks a lot. I didn't know Tom had a big nose like that.
That shield, the mission shield for Apollo 10, the astronauts have taken a good deal of razzing for putting just about everything connected with their mission, a portrayal of it, in that.
Take over the shield side of the spacecraft. Roger, we're picking up Gene now. We got rather strong backlighting from the window.
That is backlit. The camera, of course, set for the brighter light, and when the sun is behind them as it is, you're not able to see their faces as well. Looks like Cernan is going to try to block the hatch so that we get a better view. These men understand television.
Just you all drawing the window shades there. How's that, any better? Yes, indeed. We didn't get a chance to shave this morning before this show. I hope that doesn't bother anybody. It doesn't bother us. Definition is real good. We can just about read your wristwatch there, Gene. It looks like it is about 1600. 1605? 1605 Cape time.
And still keeping perfect time.
Roger, we copy.
The voice of Mission Control, that is the capsule communicator, is Bruce McCandless, one of the astronauts that has not yet flown.
Roger, we've synchronized our watches here. Beautiful. Beautiful. Looks like we got a good piece of gear here, Bruce. Yes, it does. Give me a whizzer of TP over here. Roger. Give me the knot.
Apollo 10 now 132,000 miles from Earth, just a little more than 100,000 miles from the moon. With the zoom lens pulled all the way back on that wide angle, it appears that there is much more room in that spacecraft than there really is. It's still pretty cramped. It's apparently John Young down below.
One of our problems is trying to figure out which way is up and which way is down.
That is
And for one time, you have your choice. If you don't like things right side up, you can go upside down. Roger, down here. Okay, we got one of you in each direction. That's really a ball up here, living in zero G, believe me. That's the only way to fly. Once you get going, the cost per individual passenger mile becomes rather reasonable.
strange transformation about this crew.
I noticed, boy, it sure picks up the sun's reflection intensity no matter where you go. That little reflection's coming out of my window behind me. Oh, Roger, what f-stop are you all using now? I'm at about 2.8, I believe, here. Wait a minute.
On the ground, Stafford and Young are two of the quietest men you've never talked to.
Still good color? Yes, indeed.
And they've turned out to be two of the most talkative astronauts in space we've ever had.
I just do whatever he says. Hey, Tom, the flight surgeon here wants you to be sure to log all your exercise. I got you.
Stafford chewing gum again.
This isn't Santa Peacock, but it's the best we got. Oh, dynamics like that. You guys ought to be pretty good at this PTC mode. I mean to tell you. Right, that's only got about 10 hours sleep last night. Good Roger. That's perfect zero gravity there, boy. I tell you, it's nothing like it.
This is also a way that the astronauts store things that they need or want to keep close at hand. They just set it out in space, pencils. Crew is obviously very relaxed today, well rested.
Roger, is there any sort of air currents there affecting it you can feel? Yeah, it's blowing a little bit. It's not out here, really. That's an effect we discovered a long time ago. If you watch it long enough, it'll go up. It's really hard to stabilize something so it won't move. Roger, I remember that from Gemini 10. We discovered a certain effect up here, but we can't find which way is up. Yeah. Gene, could you move the camera around slightly? We've got a very bright spot coming in the window. We want to make sure that you don't burn the target with the F2, F28 f-stop.
What they were referring to just a moment ago is the Cernan effect. You'll recall back in the Gemini missions that when hatches were open, things tended to float out, particularly film that they were hoping to bring back to Earth. For some reason or other, even though there is zero gravity, no up, no down,
it's really looking good now.
objects still tend to float up.
Now we got 3 objects going.
What a picture.
This is a real testimonial to prove you were there in case there are any doubters. People want to know what kind of men go to the moon. There's a good look at one right there. Could you believe it? Some people still don't.
Of course, to us, it appears that John Young is upside down. We could very well be wrong. Could be that Tom Stafford is upside
You all
down.
haven't set this to music. You want music? Well, we'll give you some music at the conclusion here. Okay, we'll take you back outside now. Roger.
But remember that after Apollo 8, the Christmas time flight to the moon, Frank Borman said that this was really the most relaxing time of the mission. Once the decision has been made to commit to the moon, the astronauts know that it's out of their hands for a while. They're going on a long trip, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Roger, we're standing by.
So they lean back and relax. And this crew obviously in much better shape than crews in the recent missions. At this point in their flight.
Here it comes.
They're carrying a small tape recorder on board.
This is just so that you guys don't get too excited about the TV and forget what your job is down there. We're ready for what we're about to receive. Let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. We don't mean it all.
The Apollo astronauts, apparently with fairly typical American tastes in music and art.
With this view of the Earth, looks like the United States, the landmass of the U.S. is showing up better now than it was a few minutes ago. Right, Bruce, you can really see them. Looks like the New England states are kind of clobbered in there. Right. But the main part of it's coming in real good. And again, you can see the great American desert, the Rocky Mountains, and the Sierra Nevadas there. Oh, it's beautiful on the transients before it saturates there. Okay, I'll try to give you another one.
Mentioned a moment ago that Borman said this was the most relaxing part of the flight. On the other hand, if Borman was relaxed, one of the others in his spacecraft, Bill Anders, admitted he found the flight out a bit of a drag.
You gotta be fast to catch him. I'm trying to hold it as steady as I can. Is it looking okay? Yeah, you're doing a good job on holding it.
That is a superimposition of the Earth that we are adding to perhaps help you figure out just where you are on that map. The picture from this camera tilted on its side, of course. North America to your right and South America to the left, more or less. You can see night beginning to fall there at the bottom of your screen, moving towards the top.
It appears that I have a couple little bumps and ragged edges. That's coming through down in the black and white. Yes, it is. It's coming through in the black and white, and of course in the color that we've got here, it looks like it's in the horizontal sweep. Yeah, I noticed that when we first turned it on, it didn't have that, and it really slowly started to saturate. Right, we saw those little bumps yesterday also. Right, I think it was at the end of the transmission yesterday. Right. Okay, we'll go ahead and terminate the TV pass here. I just wanted to play a little music for you so we have something up here when it gets lonely during the PTC mode. Roger, Apollo 10. We enjoyed the TV and the music. We'll be talking to you tomorrow. Adios. Roger, I hope you'll be talking to us before tomorrow.
And this time, which is one of the requirements of show business, we'll talk a little bit more about Apollo 10, television, and public relations in the space program after this message. Not everyone in the space program, of course, agrees with all of this television. It is, in their view, show business and should have no place in an engineering program. On the other hand, the price tag on the whole lunar Apollo program is $24 billion, and there's some suspicion the taxpayers think they deserve at least as much for their money. With NASA officials finding that money increasingly hard to get, they've opened up more and more of the program to television. It may be true that an engineering case can even be made, that ground controllers may spot something during one of the transmissions that will prove helpful. But Gene Cernan and the other members of this crew generally list a more basic reason for their support of onboard television.
I feel very strongly, very, very strongly, that this program is one which belongs to you and your great-grandmother and your children and the children of people sitting out there, as well as to myself. I've been fortunate enough to be able to be a direct participant in it, but I'd like to be able to, not me, but we, let me say we would like to be able to give and share part of what's going on, part of the history that's being made in our lifetime, in all of our lifetime, right now with a lot of other people. Hopefully to give other people a better understanding of what's going on, and hopefully better to share some of that excitement that's involved. There can't help but be excitement in seeing some of the things that are really happening right now, and hopefully we can do this.
Cernan's enthusiasm for television is only part of an increased effort by NASA officials from the top down to sell their program. And it is perhaps most noticeable at Houston, where CBS News correspondent Bruce Morton is standing by at the Manned Spacecraft Center. Bruce?
I think you're right. It is part of a more general campaign, noticeable even in such grubby details as the documents that all of us down here collect. The flight plan this time contained a lot of things that reporters had been asking for in the past. More specific information about distances and velocities, such homey things as translations into Eastern Daylight Time instead of ground elapsed. The press kit also seems to have more information this time. And all of that, I think, indicates, as do conversations with NASA officials here, a feeling that the agency needs now, as perhaps it didn't in the early days, to go out and grab itself a public constituency. Appropriations, as you said, have been dwindling. There are questions in a lot of people's minds here now about where the program goes once the United States does land somebody on the moon. And a general feeling that there's a new administration in. It's time to make some new friends in Washington, get some new public support. One other instance, you'll remember on a couple of the earlier Apollo flights, there was a good deal of controversy about so-called private conversations. One instance involving when Rusty Schreickert was ill, and there were private conversations from the spacecraft to the ground with the doctors. Dr. Thomas Paine, the new NASA administrator, has said this time that there may be such conversations, but that in a general way, at least, the content of all of them will be made public. And certainly this television effort is one of those things. It's true, I think, that this crew themselves are television conscious and felt a desire to share, but it's also true that this is good public relations, and the agency, that large segment of it on the ground here at Houston, is just delighted with the exposure these pictures have been getting. NASA people walk up to each other in the hall and say, hey, did you watch television last night? They had us on for an hour and a half, and that kind of thing. So there is, I think, a campaign and also some feeling here that it's working, that there is more public support, beginning with Apollo 8, Frank Borman, the Christmas trip, and that they've gained some friends in Washington. Vice President Agnew, one is told here, has become a strong supporter of the space program. So maybe it works.
Bruce, for all the emphasis on television for this particular flight, no final decision has been made with regard to the lunar landing itself. The color camera, of course, that we're seeing in operation is being operated on board the command module, while it is the lunar module that will actually make the historic excursion to the moon. Out at Grumman Aircraft, CBS News correspondent Nelson Benton is standing by with engineer Scott McLeod. Gentlemen, what's the prospect for live in-color television from the moon?
There's millions of dollars worth of equipment tied up at LEM that is flying on this flight, but the lunar module itself, this flight, will not have any television. In other words, when LEM separates from the command module on this flight of Apollo 10, there will be no television aboard. And when Apollo 11 goes to the moon, there will be television aboard. It will carry this camera, the one that was flown on Apollo 9. But Scott McLeod, tell us more about the configuration for television on the lunar flight.
Well, a camera similar to this one, Nelson, will be carried in the descent stage of the lunar module.
But not in the cabin.
But not in the cabin, that's correct.
It has other limitations.
Yes, it's black and white.
So, as current plans are, David, the television from the moon will take place once the lunar module does get on the moon, and it will come back in living black and white. But Jim Lovell, on the flight of Apollo 8, told us that things were pretty much black and white on the moon anyway.
Yes.
On the LEM that is flying this time, we reported yesterday that the crew could expect no surprises. We now find out from some of Scott McLeod's spies that there is a plaque mounted inside the LEM. Scott, what is this and how did it happen?
Well, this is a little message from the consulting pilots, the last ones in the cockpit just about, to the crew when they crawl through from the command module to the LEM. This is one of the first things that they'll see.
On one of the hatches, they'll find Snoopy, the namesake for the lunar module, lying on top of the lunar module, receiving a message from the command module that says, "Darn it, Snoopy, the flight plan specifically states that," well, it doesn't go any further, but the flight plan says right now that we in Snoopy are passive, and David, we are passive.
Nelson, we'll be looking ahead to the remainder of this flight of Apollo 10 in a moment. The astronauts this afternoon performed a mid-course correction, a slight change in their trajectory. The first, and according to the way things look now, their last mid-course correction on the way to the moon. They are now at just about the halfway point. And in fact, this one today can't really be called a correction in the usual meaning of the word, since it was planned all along. The purpose was to make a change in the lunar orbit to get a better look at the lunar landing site. Without the change, the spacecraft orbit would have been 5 degrees from the moon's equator. Now it is expected to be within 1 degree of the equator. Not only does this improve the orbit, it also provided another good test of the spacecraft engine, the engine that will put them into orbit and take them out. Tomorrow shapes up as a day like any other when you're closing in on the moon. Perhaps some more television later in the day. But Wednesday marks a major test as the crew really puts on the brakes for an entry into lunar orbit. The same situation that we've been in only one other time in man's history, and that was on the crew of Apollo 8, the Christmas time flight. Thursday will feature the descent of the LEM, Snoopy, to within an unparalleled 10 miles of the moon's surface. With that maneuver, we should have a pretty good idea of whether man has now ventured into the sphere of the probable rather than only the possible. That's the story. David Shoemaker, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
This has been a CBS News special report, The Flight of Apollo 10. Brought to you by Western Electric, manufacturing and supply unit of the Bell System, as part of our continuing coverage of important news events. Next Apollo update on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. This is CBS.
If you like this video, please press the subscribe button to subscribe to this channel, and also give it a thumbs up. You can also be notified when I post further videos on the anniversary of this flight and on the anniversary of the flight of Apollo 11 coming up in July. You can also support this channel with a donation by using the link in the description.